I think we're at the start of an era where really it seems very hard to see where it's going to go.
The speed at which artificial intelligence is messing with jobs is simply mind-boggling. But AI is also influencing the emergence of new technologies which drive productivity and economic growth.
And if we only have a few firms dominating the industry and deciding this direction, then what could happen is these firms might not be very much open to innovations that disrupt the market, and this could further worsen inequality.
This new set of technologies obviously opens up a whole new range of jobs in a stunningly fast fashion, and how that plays out for inequality and distribution, I think it's very hard to say. I'm Andy Berg. I'm Deputy Director at the Institute for Capacity Development.
My name is Maryam Vaziri, and I work as an economist in the Institute for Capacity Development.
The IMF's Finance and Development magazine dedicates its entire December edition to how artificial intelligence is changing lives and economies across the globe. Economists Andy Berg and Maryam Vaziri, along with Chris Papagiorgio, write about how some will win and others will lose as the use of AI grows. So, Andy, we spoke a few years ago about the impact of technology, robots at that point, on jobs, and how ultimately it would increase productivity. Remind us of where we're coming from in terms of the big technological changes within the last century and how labor responded to those.
The story of labor for the last, say, 100 years and before is really the story of technology to a large extent. Of course, we shouldn't lose track of the fundamental benefits of technology. None of us want to get rid of indoor toilets or internal combustion, but it's always been a challenge for labor. The industrial revolutions of the 19th century were tremendously challenging. They brought us the first time a rise in living standards after millennia of that not happening. But they also brought us world wars, arguably, communism, all the struggles associated with trying to develop a modern industrial economy. So more recently, the situation evolves, but there's still been this kind of twin situation of improving standards of living, improving productivity, and great challenges for income distribution, for social structures, and for labor. In the last half of the 20th century, it was about computers, going way back to when John F. Kennedy and his administration and others were very worried about what was seeming to happen with automation. And he said, I think in the early 60s, that these computers are going to do great things for our standard of living and for productivity, but where are the jobs going to be? And now people kind of poo-poo that argument and saying, well, that turned out to be wrong, because look at how many jobs were created since then, and a huge number of jobs were created. But it was only a few years after that we started to see this tremendous divergence in wages between low-skilled and high-skilled workers. Was that all about computers and technology? Probably not. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things going on, but was it partly about technology? Almost surely yes. And what we saw in that wave of technology was that computers and related technologies were substituting for what economists came to identify as routine work, so that they were good at things, you like bookkeeping, to take one example, that used to occupy a lot of medium skill labor. And the labor market, at least in the U.S. and I think in other countries too, was hollowed out. The demand for that medium skill type of work was hollowed out, such that the wages for the people who were good at that kind of thing have fallen a lot relative to other wages. That doesn't mean someone like that was better off 50 years ago than now, but they were relatively better off then, for sure.
Right. So like you say, higher productivity often means fewer jobs for the low-skilled workers, a lot of dislocation, a lot of retraining for workers. So it looks like, it seems to me anyway, that AI presents that same scenario, but on steroids, no? Maryam?
That is exactly true. What we see with technological advancement is that it often impacts the composition of jobs that are available, both in terms of low-skilled, but especially in terms of high-skilled jobs. Mm-hmm. And as a result of this, as demand for these different types of job changes, what determines the market outcome is really the race between demand and supply. And what we've seen in the past is that the demand for higher skilled workers, especially those that have college degrees, have led to having a skill premium. For example, work by David Otter has shown us that real wages of those who have college degrees has increased over the past couple of decades, while the real wages of those with lower levels of education, low-skilled workers, have either remained stagnant or even declined. And in terms of general trends, what we've seen is that labor share of total income, or what labor is taking home, has been also declining too. And these are trends that we've seen in the past, also with automation and advancements in information and communication technology. And kind of when we look at AI, there are again similarities with ICT in the sense that they also tend to disrupt the labor market, and they also tend to affect the composition of jobs that are available. But there are some differences because with automation, what we saw was mostly kind of replacing or displacing lower skilled workers. But what AI does, or there's some evidence that it shows that it can also close the skill gap. And there's evidence that shows that it, in fact, benefits those that have lower levels of skills. So this is in really contrast with what we've seen with automation, and is a key difference between AI and previous waves of technology, such as digitalization.
Interesting. And so, Andy, this, in your article, you also speak about how capital in the form of machinery pretty much always benefits the skilled worker over the lower skilled worker. How did that work in the 60s, and how do you see that playing out with AI?
Well, let me respectfully disagree slightly with a premise of your question.
Okay.
It hasn't always benefited the skilled workers. The Luddites in the 19th century, who famously smashed machinery that competed with them for work in creating textiles, they were skilled. And so in that period, the view, at least a view among economic historians, is that those machines were allowing unskilled workers from the countryside to do the work of these skilled craftsmen. And so that's a different story then. But I think what the evidence shows, as Maryam said, the evidence from the last 60 years or so is that the machines seem to be replacing relatively unskilled workers. Not the most unskilled workers, in the sense that people who work, say, in agriculture have not been substituted so much recently. Picking strawberries has been a job that until recently machines couldn't do. That may be changing now, but for until recently, those kinds of physical tasks often were not, home health aides, things like that, were not replaceable by machines or by computers. That may be changing. Now, I think where we're going is very hard to say. I mean, the pace of change with the recent rounds of AI, with the large language models and generative AI, is just astounding. And it does seem to have different patterns. People have been doing experiments with ChatGPT and related technologies where they put a bunch of humans in a room either with or without the assistance of GPT. And they ask them to do things like write something or produce even creative content like advertising content or do some computer programming. And they find that GPT helps productivity a lot, but that it helps the least skilled in the group more. And so it in that at least narrow way, it could be equalizing rather than skill promoting.
If they have access to ChatGPT.
It's a very important point. I do want to I do think that this is going to change a lot of things for a lot of people. I mean, to tell a kind of I think a good news and bad news story about how it might even work at the IMF. The IMF is a very writing-oriented institution. You to some extent get promoted if you're a good drafter, as we say, because that's how we produce so much of what we produce is drafted. I got promoted partly because I'm a good drafter. Now, GPT could be a big leveler. It means that skill is relatively devalued over other skills. Now, I do think a problem we've had at the IMF is this emphasis on drafting because it has given an advantage to native English speakers. And it's been a challenge for us to overcome that. And so in that sense, this leveling effect with respect to drafting could be very important for a sort of a fundamental goal of the institution. But it obviously creates, even in this little space really, when we think about the whole economy, it creates challenges. And we know that's going to be writ large. That kind of thing is going to be writ large throughout the economy.
How interesting. So, Maryam, I'm going to ask you this, but Andy, you're welcome to jump in. So even if labor, or when labor manages to effectively respond to the changes brought on by AI, what do you think this means for wages generally? I mean, and the rising inequality that we've seen since, the Industrial Revolution?
So to talk about the inequality and wages, I think one thing we need to consider is who owns AI or who is the owner of AI capital. And what we've seen so far is that there are a few corporations that dominate these leading AI technologies. This could be because developing these technologies are often very costly, they depend heavily on data, and this is something that only a few firms have access to or have the resources to develop these.
So you're talking about competition?
I'm exactly talking about competition. That's where I'm going. So this means that, as you mentioned, kind of the competition on these AI technologies are going to be lower. There's going to be monopolization happening in the market. And these trends are not new. We've seen something similar when it comes to ICT, that kind of higher adoption of these ICT technologies also have led to increased market concentration, firms having higher market power, and also labor share declining, which is what you're alluding to in terms of inequality. And this is something we are seeing with AI too, and it could worsen potentially these trends. But there's another aspect to it too, and this is really related to innovation and growth. Innovation not only is a source of productivity growth and economic growth, but it also determines the direction of technologies that are going to emerge. And if we only have a few firms dominating the industry and deciding this direction, then what could happen is further lowering of the competition in the market. These firms might not be very much open to innovations that disrupt the market and are going to take their market share away. And this could further worsen inequality.
Andy, would you like to add anything to that?
I think we're at the start of an era where really it seems very hard to see where it's going to go. On the one hand, there are these open source large language models. And you can get the best model in the world for $20 a month. So it's a little hard to see how this is such a restricted thing. And you could say that the data that these models need is out there. It's in the internet, or you can collect it by just looking around and taking videos. Mm-hmm. That's one view. But there's another view that actually some very small number of companies are way ahead of the others. That there's a first mover advantage. There's an advantage in learning how to do this stuff, in curating these data sets, because you can't just take any, there's a garbage in, garbage out problem. So access to really good data is what's really critical, not just quantities. And that maybe there are really just a small number of firms that are way ahead and that have access to this good data. And then we then face these problems that Maryam was alluding to. And I don't think we know how it's going to play out. It's also true that we don't know where this current phase of change is going to go. If you asked computer scientists in 2019, how long will it take for robots or AI to write as well as the top quartile of humans, as the best 25% of humans, they would have said 2050. If you ask them now, or if you asked them earlier this year, they said 2024. That's a stunning pace of change. If you ask them when will AI be as creative as humans, I guess they mean the average human, I'm not sure, they said 2055. Mm-hmm. Now in 2023, they said 2028. So it's the pace of change is incredible. But on the other hand, technology tends to advance not really in an exponential, where it just gets steeper and steeper, but as kind of an S-curve. There's an exponential period where we all get excited that things are getting better fast in terms of the technology, and then it kind of levels out as the limits of that technology get recognized. And then you kind of wait for the next S-curve. And so we don't know with these GPTs and this wave of technology, are we sort of at the beginning of the steep part? Or are we already getting to the part where it flattens out as we recognize the limitations of these things? Yeah. And I do think for economists, some of the debate that you can easily find online are not so relevant. Is this really intelligent? Or to what extent are these things intelligent? The point for an economist is that if technology marches along and starts to get better and better at more and more of the things that humans can do, then this sort of definitional question of when does it become intelligent or when does it become have a certain form of intelligence is in some sense irrelevant from a labor market perspective. And that seems to be where we are, where the computers are getting better. They haven't stopped automating unskilled labor. But this new set of technologies obviously opens up a whole new range of jobs in a stunningly fast fashion. And how that plays out for inequality and distribution, even productivity, although we expect productivity to go way up and therefore standards of living on the whole to go way up. But how that all plays out, I think it's very hard to say.
Okay, but if we're talking about displacement and how this may well increase productivity and maybe increase jobs, the answer seems to be the ability for workers to learn new skills. So what happens in those countries where education systems are inadequate, where opportunities to learn those new skills aren't that obvious? I mean, what do you think AI means for development generally in those countries?
Well, I hate to give a two-handed answer, but I don't see how I can responsibly give any other kind. I'm in ICD, Maryam and I are in ICD, and we're in the capacity development business. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it from that perspective, this is a tremendous opportunity for people around the world to get access to patient, knowledgeable tutors on every possible topic. It is fantastic. I took an online course the other month, and half of the content of that course was unnecessary because of GPT. The forums, the peer-to-peer learning, the grading of the tests, the answering, the Q&As with the professor. Half of that stuff I didn't need because I could ask GPT as I went along. So you can imagine billions of people around the world getting access to all that knowledge at relatively low cost. And that could be tremendous. Or this issue that, it could become practical not just for education, but for the jobs that people are doing. If they're trying to learn how to program, they have this very intelligent co-pilot who can help them do a better job. And we do see already that it's sort of equalizing. That's to say that if you're a less productive programmer, you benefit more. So this logic could easily extend across countries. But the kinds of arguments that Maryam made also about concentration of power also potentially apply. Will countries have access to big enough data sets, or will they have to pay rents to companies that do have access to the data sets and the big models?
Maryam, what do you think? I mean, in terms of development, do you see AI as being something that will benefit development overall? I mean, you've started traveling for the fund. You work in ICD, as Andy was saying, working on training programs. How do you see AI affecting the work of the fund in developing countries?
I agree with Andy that there is a lot of uncertainty going on here. It could benefit the less developed countries because it provides access to certain technologies that previously were very costly for them. And this could help them really catch up. It could lower the differences in many aspects across countries. But at the same time, as also Andy mentioned, we need expertise, we need infrastructure for these countries to be able to benefit from these new technologies that are becoming available. And without the infrastructure, it's very difficult to see how they're going to catch up. So this could, in effect, also lead to further divergence, so that there is hope and there's opportunity, but there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what ultimately is going to happen, in my opinion.
Indeed. Yep.
To take up this infrastructure point, which is very important, one component of the infrastructure required is what you might call organizational capital, the ability to adapt organizations to the needs of the new technology. It's an old story in technology that the new tools don't really help that much until you really change the way you work. When electric motors came along in the early 20th century to factories, at first they replaced the steam engine with the electric motor. And they had one giant axle, and the electric motor ran the axle instead of the steam engine, and it didn't really improve productivity very much. Maybe a little bit of efficiency, but there are also all the pains of a new technology. Then they realized that there's no reason to just have one motor. For steam engines, you want to have one big one. But for electric motors, you can have lots of them. And so they could break up that one axle, completely reorganize the factory, have different things go at different speeds. And that was a really transformational change in how the factories worked. This is a well-known story for electricity. And similar stories are there to some extent for computers. And the current round seems to be actually very absorbable in some sense. It's pretty easy to use it as a co-pilot. Just do the same thing you always do and just have a GPT help you for certain tasks like writing or programming. But we don't yet know what the transformational effects will be once we really internalize these tools and reorganize how we think about work. And some institutions are going to be much better at that than others, and maybe even societies. And so how that plays out, we don't know, but that could be one feature either of the equalizing effect, but also of the winner-take-all kind of effect.
So, as you alluded to earlier, all this is happening very quickly. Technology, some of the predictions that were for 2050 are now 2024, which is only a couple of months from now. Is it too late, do you think, to put guardrails in place to sort of mitigate some of the distributional impact of AI that we talked about in this conversation? Do you think that the international community can come together on this to sort of protect some of the more likely victims of this technological revolution?
These are hard and important questions. I wouldn't say it's too late, certainly not to mitigate the social effects. I mean, this is going to be with us as it's been with us for a long time. So we're going to be struggling to make life better for people as these technologies come on and to make life better for more people for a long time. There's a set of issues about how to influence the development of the technology itself or whether to and how that can work. That, I think, really hard for me to say. I do know that there has been some success in areas like biotechnology over the decades in some sorts of collective decision-making about some things. It's hard to see whether there's how something could work internationally in this space. It's only a few players, really, who are at the forefront in terms of countries. But it doesn't seem like a really propitious moment for countries to get together and cooperate in this area on the whole. On the mitigation side, though, to some extent, some of the agenda from previous waves of technological change remains from my point of view. Having the social safety net depend on your work, on your job, seems dangerous at a time of great turmoil about jobs. Yeah. Having medical care in the U.S. depend on your work seems really kind of an own goal or an unforced error. Is something that ought to change. And that's a kind of a granular country-specific point, but the point is more general. And we people talk a lot about universal basic income and things like that. And as things evolve, those kinds of things may presumably become more relevant as considerations. But the broader point about separating social safety net from work seems to be a very important one. What we do, how we manage education, I wish I knew what to tell my own son about what to get educated in to be well-placed for the future. We have to be agile. And, of course, people skills are always going to be important. But that's also a hard question.
Maryam, I'm just going to throw this out there. This AI is presenting, economic problems globally that I don't think that economists alone can solve. How do you feel about, the field of economics? Is AI introducing perhaps a new approach to solving economic problems in the world?
That's a difficult question. I think the way I'm thinking about it is mostly the skills I have to learn. I have to adapt myself to these new AI technologies that are getting developed so that I do have the updated skills to do the job that in the first place I was passionate about and I decided to do. I think economics as a field generally in the past few years has been becoming more interdisciplinary, has been talking more to other fields. But certainly with AI development, there's going to be even higher need to keep these conversations and to make sure that we are using the tools that are being developed in other fields as well, so that the field as a whole is not falling behind.
Andy Berg is Deputy Director. Maryam Vaziri is an economist, both in the Institute for Capacity Development. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Again, Again, that was IMF economists Andy Berg and Maryam Vaziri speaking about their article co-authored with Chris Papagiorgio in the December edition of Finance and Development magazine. Look for Technology's Bifurcated Bite at imf.org/F&D. And you can hear more podcasts about AI or climate mitigation or central banking. The list goes on. Go to imf.org/podcasts or wherever you listen. You can also follow us on X, what used to be Twitter, at IMF_podcast. I'm Bruce Edwards. Thanks for listening.